Two kids under a sprawling oak tree make a pinky promise, a vow to love each other forever. "Let's get married when we grow up," she says, her eyes shining with hope. Years later, life pulls them apart. One clutches a red ribbon as a fading memory. The other writes a book inspired by a love she can't forget. But when their worlds collide again, through music, betrayal, and a shocking confession, a dark secret threatens to shatter everything. Will a childhood promise survive lies, heartbreak, and revenge? Or is love destined to be rewritten? When the ribbon ties them back together, what will remain? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Under the warm summer sun in the peaceful countryside village of Pine Grove, 3-year-old white girl Emma Carter skipped through the tall grass, her curly brown pigtails bouncing with each step. Her mother, Abigail, watched from a nearby wooden bench as her daughter explored the world with the boundless curiosity only a child could possess. The majestic oak tree that stood at the heart of the village green stretched its mighty branches toward the sky, creating a natural canopy that dappled the ground with dancing shadows. It was there that Emma first spotted a quiet little boy sitting cross-legged in the grass, carefully arranging small twigs into patterns. "Hi," Emma called out, her voice bright and clear as a bell. The black boy looked up, startled by her sudden appearance, but didn't run away. Instead, he offered a shy smile that made his blue eyes sparkle. "I'm Emma," she announced, plopping down beside him without waiting for an invitation. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the gentle rustling of leaves above them. James Hayes, Ethan's father, sat nearby on another bench, sharing pleasant conversation with Abigail. They both turned their attention to their children, amused by the instant connection forming between them. Emma studied Ethan's twig arrangement with intense interest. "Are you making a picture?" she asked, tilting her head to one side. Ethan nodded. "It's supposed to be a house," he explained, his voice growing slightly stronger as his confidence built. "I love houses," Emma exclaimed, immediately reaching for some twigs to help. "Let's make it bigger. It can be our house." The two children worked together, their small hands carefully placing twigs and leaves to create their imaginary home. As they built, Emma chattered away, sharing her dreams and ideas, while Ethan listened intently, occasionally adding his own quiet suggestions. After they finished their twig house, Emma stood up suddenly, her eyes bright with inspiration. "I know," she declared, reaching for Ethan's hand. "Let's get married when we grow up." Ethan's cheeks turned pink, but a smile spread across his face. "Okay," he agreed softly. "We have to make it official," Emma insisted, holding out her tiny pinky finger. "Pinky promise." Ethan linked his pinky with hers, and they shook on it solemnly. "When we're big," Emma announced, "we'll come back to this tree and get married right here." From their bench, Abigail and James couldn't help but laugh at the innocent exchange. "Well, James," Abigail said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes, "looks like we might be in-laws someday." James chuckled warmly. At least they're planning ahead. The oak tree's leaves rustled gently in the breeze, as if nature itself was blessing the children's sweet promise. Emma and Ethan spent the rest of the afternoon playing beneath its protective branches, creating more twig structures and sharing their simple dreams. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the village green, neither child wanted to leave their special spot. The oak tree had become more than just a meeting place. It was now their sacred space, witness to their innocent vow. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Emma asked her mother, her eyes pleading. "Of course, sweetheart," Abigail replied, taking her daughter's hand. "I'm sure Ethan and his dad will be here too." The two families parted ways as the evening approached, but the children kept looking back at each other until they could no longer see one another. The magnificent oak tree stood silent guard over their childhood promise, its ancient branches seeming to reach out protectively over the spot where two young hearts had made their first connection. The seasons changed like pages turning in a storybook, and with each passing year, Emma and Ethan's friendship blossomed beneath the watchful branches of their oak tree. Every afternoon, rain or shine, they would meet at their special spot, their laughter echoing through the village green, Emma's imagination transformed their simple playground into magical kingdoms, with the oak tree serving as their castle. Ethan, though quieter, always followed her lead, his gentle smile never far from his face as they acted out her elaborate stories. "One day," Emma would often say, sitting cross-legged in the grass, "we'll have a real house right here next to our tree." Ethan would nod, adding his own dreams to their shared future. "With a music room," he'd say softly, "where I can play piano." Their parents watched their friendship grow stronger with each passing day. James Hayes often remarked to Abigail Carter how Ethan had come out of his shell since meeting Emma, while Abigail would smile at how Emma had learned patience and gentleness from her quiet friend. But life has a way of changing even the most perfect stories. On a crisp autumn afternoon, when the oak's leaves had turned golden, Abigail Carter's face was heavy with worry as she watched the children play. She knew the news she carried would break their hearts. That evening, as Emma sat at the dinner table pushing food around her plate, Abigail broke the news. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "your father's company is transferring him to the city. We'll be moving at the end of the month." Emma's fork clattered to the plate. "But we can't move," she cried, tears welling up in her eyes. "What about Ethan? What about our tree?" The thought of leaving behind her best friend and their sacred spot was too much to bear. The next day, Emma's feet dragged as she walked to the oak tree. Ethan was already there, and one look at her face told him something was wrong. "Emma?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We're moving away," she said, the words catching in her throat. "To the city. Dad got a new job." The tears she'd been holding back all morning finally spilled over. Ethan stood frozen, his blue eyes wide with shock. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and hugged her tightly. They stayed that way for a long time, neither wanting to let go. The days that followed passed too quickly, like sand slipping through their fingers. On their final afternoon together, the oak tree seemed to droop its branches, as if sharing in their sadness. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out a bright red ribbon. "Give me your wrist," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan held out his arm, watching as she carefully tied the ribbon around it. "This is a special ribbon," she explained, her fingers trembling as she secured the knot. "It's magic. As long as you wear it, it'll bring us back together someday." Ethan touched the ribbon gently. "Promise?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise," Emma replied firmly, though tears streamed down her cheeks. "We made a pinky promise to get married under this tree, remember? And I never break my promises." They spent their last hours together sitting beneath the oak tree, shoulders touching, memorizing every detail of their special place. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground that they traced with their fingers, trying to make time stand still. When Abigail finally came to call Emma home, both children clung to each other, their goodbye too big for words. As Emma walked away, she kept looking back, watching Ethan grow smaller and smaller, his hand raised in farewell, the red ribbon bright against his wrist. The years marched forward, but Ethan's heart remained tethered to the past. Now 15, he sat at his desk every Sunday evening, carefully writing letters to Emma. The red ribbon, though faded, still circled his wrist, a constant reminder of their promise. He'd had to retie it several times as he grew, but he never considered taking it off. "Dear Emma," he wrote, his neat handwriting filling the page. "The oak tree misses you. Sometimes I sit there and play my guitar, imagining you're still here, making up stories about knights and princesses." He paused, tapping his pen against the paper. "I started writing songs. Most of them are about you." In the city, Emma's room was filled with the bustle of traffic outside her window, so different from the peaceful countryside she'd left behind. She kept Ethan's photo hidden in her drawer, taking it out each night before bed. The snapshot showed them both under their oak tree, gap-toothed grins and messy hair, their arms around each other's shoulders. "I miss him so much, Mom," Emma confided in Abigail one evening, hugging her pillow tight. "Why doesn't he write to me?" Abigail's brow furrowed with concern. But sweetheart, hasn't he? I've been putting all his letters in the mailbox? Emma shook her head, confusion clouding her face. I haven't received any letters. Not one. Unknown to both Emma and Ethan, Sophie Carter, Emma's cousin who lived nearby, had been intercepting the letters. Each morning she would check the mailbox before Emma woke up, hiding away Ethan's heartfelt words in a box under her bed. Sophie had always envied the special bond Emma and Ethan shared, the way Emma's eyes lit up when she talked about him. One day, Sophie made a decision that would change everything. She sat at her desk, practicing Emma's handwriting until it was nearly perfect. Then, with jealousy guiding her hand, she wrote a letter that would break Ethan's heart. When Ethan found the envelope in his mailbox, his heart leaped. Finally, after all these years, Emma had written back. His hands trembled as he opened it, but as he read the words, his world crumbled. Dear Ethan, the letter began. I've been meaning to write for a long time. The truth is, I've moved on with my life. Those childhood promises we made were just silly games. I have new friends now, and I've forgotten about our old tree and those days in the village. Please stop writing to me. Emma. Ethan read the letter over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. He stumbled to the oak tree, their special place, and slid down against its trunk. For the first time since Emma left, he untied the red ribbon from his wrist. But he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. Instead, he tucked it into his pocket, a reminder of what he'd lost. From that day forward, Ethan stopped writing letters. He poured his pain into his music, writing songs about lost love and broken promises. The oak tree became a place of solitude rather than joy, where he would sit for hours with his guitar playing melodies that spoke of his heartbreak. Meanwhile, Emma continued to wait for letters that would never come, not knowing that her cousin's jealousy had severed the connection she held so dear. She threw herself into her writing, filling notebooks with stories about a boy with kind eyes and a red ribbon around his wrist, trying to keep their memories alive in the only way she knew how. Years passed and music became Ethan's constant companion. His guitar case lay open at his feet as he performed at the local coffee shop, the Morning Brew. The soft yellow lights cast shadows across his face as his fingers danced over the strings. The red ribbon, now worn and faded, remained safely tucked in his wallet, a reminder he couldn't quite let go of. This next song is called Promises Under the Oak, Ethan announced quietly into the microphone. The crowd leaned in, drawn to the raw emotion in his voice. His songs always carried a hint of longing that touched something deep in his listeners' hearts. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly owner of the flower shop, wiped away a tear as Ethan sang. That boy put so much feeling into every word, she whispered to her friend. Makes you wonder who broke his heart. The local newspaper had started featuring articles about the talented young musician who could silence a room with his heartfelt performances. Hayes brings authenticity to every performance, one review read. His lyrics speaking of childhood promises and lost connections that resonate with anyone who's ever loved and lost. Meanwhile, in the city, Emma sat at her desk, surrounded by crumpled papers and empty coffee cups. Her laptop screen glowed with the words of her first novel, The Boy with the Red Ribbon. The story poured out of her, a tale of two childhood friends separated by circumstance, their promise symbolized by a simple red ribbon. Her literary agent, Martha, had been immediately drawn to the authenticity of Emma's writing. There's something so real about your main character, she'd said during their first meeting. The way you describe his gentle nature, his music, it's like you know him. Emma's cheeks had flushed. He's inspired by someone I used to know, she'd admitted softly. The novel gained attention from small publishing houses, with readers praising its emotional depth. Book clubs discussed the bittersweet nature of childhood promises and the power of first love. Yet few knew that every word Emma wrote was anchored in her own heart story. During her writing sessions, Emma would often pause to look at the old photograph she kept on her desk. The edges were worn from handling, but the image remained clear. Two children beneath an oak tree, their smiles untouched by time or distance. Ethan's music career grew steadily in the village. Local venues began booking him regularly, and a small but devoted following emerged. They requested the same songs again and again, especially the ones about the girl who left and the promises that remained unbroken in his heart. On quiet evenings, he would sit under the old oak tree with his guitar, composing new melodies. The songs spoke of red ribbons, pinky promises, and the enduring hope of reunion. Though he'd tried dating over the years, no one quite filled the void that Emma's departure had left. Emma's novel went through multiple drafts, each version diving deeper into the emotions she'd carried since childhood. Her editor praised the authenticity of the love story, never knowing that each scene was painted with the colors of Emma's own memories. Both found a measure of success in their creative pursuits, their art touching others who had experienced similar losses. Yet despite their achievements, both Ethan and Emma felt as though they were telling an unfinished story, one that still awaited its true ending. The city buzzed with energy as Ethan walked down its busy streets, his guitar case slung over his shoulder. The upcoming music festival had brought musicians from all over the country, and he still couldn't believe he'd been invited to perform. Shop windows gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the aroma of fresh coffee drifted from nearby cafes. As he passed a quaint bookstore, something in the window display caught his eye. His steps faltered, and he moved closer to the glass. There, prominently featured, was a book with a simple yet striking cover, a red ribbon wrapped around an oak tree. The title made his heart skip a beat. The Boy with the Red Ribbon, by Emma Carter. His fingers instinctively touched his wallet, where his own worn ribbon lay safely tucked away. With trembling hands, he pushed open the bookstore's door, causing a small bell to chime above. "Can I help you find anything?" a friendly clerk asked. Ethan barely heard her as he made his way to the display. He picked up the book, his eyes scanning the back cover. The synopsis made his breath catch. A tale of childhood promises, first love, and the power of a simple red ribbon to connect two hearts across time and distance. Finding a quiet corner, he began to read. Each page felt like stepping back into his own memories. The oak tree, the childhood promise, even the description of the boy's shy nature matched his own. His heart raced as he realized Emma had written their story. A promotional poster caught his attention. Book signing today. Meet Emma Carter, 4 p.m. The current time showed 3:45 on his phone. Ethan's mind raced. Should he reveal himself? After all these years, would she even recognize him? The memory of that forged letter still stung, but now doubt crept in. Had there been more to the story? He joined the line of eager readers, giving a false name when asked by the staff member organizing the queue. His palms grew sweaty as he watched Emma interact with her fans. She looked different from the little girl in his memories, yet somehow exactly the same. Her warm smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked, the gentle tilt of her head when she listened. Finally, it was his turn. Emma looked up, her welcoming smile firmly in place. "Who should I make it out to?" "Michael," he said softly, using his middle name. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something flickered across her face. A hint of recognition, perhaps, or maybe just confusion. Her brow furrowed slightly as she opened his copy. "Have we met before? There's something familiar about you." Ethan's heart thundered in his chest. "I just have one of those faces," he managed to say, his voice barely steady. As she signed, Emma paused. "You know, it's funny. You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. Someone very special." Her voice carried a touch of melancholy. "The boy with the red ribbon?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. Emma's pen stilled on the page. She looked up at him, really looked at him this time, searching his face. "Yes," she whispered. "How did you—" But the line behind him was growing impatient. The bookstore staff member gently urged him along. Ethan took his signed copy, fighting the urge to reveal everything right there. As he walked away, he heard Emma call out, "Wait!" But he kept moving, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. She remembered him, or at least she remembered their story. But did she truly remember him? And if she did, why had she never replied to his letters? He stepped out of the bookstore, clutching the signed book to his chest, more confused than ever about what to do next. Emma sat in her modern apartment staring at the city lights through her floor-to-ceiling windows. The stunning view that usually brought her comfort now felt cold and distant. Her cousin Sophie had just left, leaving behind a confession that shattered Emma's world. "I'm so sorry, Emma," Sophie had said, tears streaming down her face. "I was young and jealous. You had everything. The perfect life, the perfect love story. I forged that letter to Ethan, telling him you'd forgotten him." Sophie's voice had cracked with emotion. "I made him believe you wanted nothing to do with him anymore." The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. All those years of silence from Ethan suddenly made sense. He hadn't abandoned their promise. He'd been led to believe she had. Her engagement ring from Ryan felt heavy on her finger, a constant reminder of how far she'd strayed from her true path. Ryan Mitchell, with his expensive suits and controlling nature, was nothing like the sweet boy who'd held her hand under the oak tree. Emma's phone buzzed. Another message from Ryan asking about wedding venue options. Her stomach churned. She couldn't go through with it. Not now. Not ever. She drove to Ryan's penthouse office, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. The security guard nodded her through. She was still, technically, the future Mrs. Mitchell. Ryan looked up from his desk, his practiced smile falling as he saw her expression. "Emma, what's wrong?" "I can't marry you," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. She pulled off the diamond ring and placed it on his desk. "I'm sorry, Ryan, but this isn't right." His face darkened. "This is about him, isn't it? That musician you wrote about?" Ryan's fingers curled into fists. "I've seen the way you look at that book of yours. It was never just a story." "Ryan, please. Do you know what it takes to build an empire like mine?" His voice turned cold. "It takes control. Perfect control. And I won't let some small-town guitarist ruin everything I've planned." Emma backed away, frightened by the hatred in his eyes. "Whatever you're thinking, don't. This is between us." Ryan's laugh was hollow. "I've already looked into your precious Ethan Hayes. Did you know he's performing at the Downtown Music Festival next week? Such a shame if something were to go wrong with his big break." "You wouldn't dare," Emma gasped. "Watch me." Ryan turned to his computer, dismissing her. "Security will show you out." Emma rushed from the building, her heart pounding. She had to find Ethan, had to warn him, but more than that, she had to tell him the truth about Sophie's letter, about their shared past, about the love she'd never truly forgotten. In her car, she pulled out her phone and searched for information about the Downtown Music Festival. There it was, Ethan Hayes, scheduled to perform on the main stage. She could almost see Ryan's calculating mind working, planning ways to sabotage Ethan's performance. "I won't let him hurt you," she whispered, touching the festival poster on her phone screen. "Not when I've finally found you again." She started her car, determination replacing her fear. She had a lot to make right, and not much time to do it. The red ribbon she'd given Ethan all those years ago might have bound them together, but it was her turn now to fight for their connection. Ryan Mitchell sat in his sleek office, his fingers drumming against the polished mahogany desk as he made the call. The venue manager of the Downtown Music Festival, Mark Thompson, answered on the second ring. "Mr. Thompson," Ryan's voice was smooth as silk, but carried an underlying threat. "I understand Ethan Hayes is scheduled to perform at your festival next week." "That's correct," Mark replied cautiously. "He's one of our most anticipated acts." "I'm afraid that won't work for me." Ryan pulled up a document on his computer screen. "My legal team has discovered some concerning irregularities in your permit applications. It would be a shame if these issues came to light right before your event." The line went silent for a moment. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Mitchell?" "Think of it as a business proposition. Either Hayes is removed from the lineup, or my lawyers will ensure your festival never happens again." Ryan's smile was cold. "The choice is yours." Across town, Ethan sat on a worn leather stool in his small studio, guitar in hand. The red ribbon, faded but still intact, was tied carefully around the instrument's neck. His fingers moved across the strings, playing the melody that had been haunting him since seeing Emma at the book signing. Local fans gathered outside his studio window, drawn by the music. They'd been supporting him since his first performances at the small coffee shop down the street. Their excitement for his upcoming festival appearance touched him deeply. "That's beautiful," one young fan called through the open window. "Will you play it at the festival?" Ethan nodded, managing a small smile. "It's called Red Ribbon Promises. It's about—" He paused, his fingers still on the strings. "It's about keeping faith in love, even when it seems impossible." Meanwhile, Emma sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by printouts of social media posts and local music reviews. Her laptop displayed various photos of Ethan performing at small venues across the city. "Come on, Ethan," she muttered, scanning through another article. "Where are you?" Her eyes caught on a detail in one photo, the red ribbon tied to his guitar. Her heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be the same one, could it? After all these years? She noticed a recurring location tag in his recent posts, the Morning Brew coffee shop. Emma quickly pulled up the shop's social media page, scrolling through their events calendar. There it was. Weekly performance by local artist Ethan Hayes, every Thursday. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Problem solved. Your small-town musician won't be performing at the festival after all." Emma's hands shook with anger. She knew Ryan's tactics well enough to guess what he'd done. The festival had been Ethan's chance to reach a wider audience, to share his music with the world, and Ryan was trying to take that away from him. Back at the festival office, Mark Thompson stared at his phone long after Ryan had hung up. The threat of legal action could destroy not just this year's festival, but his entire business. With a heavy heart, he began drafting the email to Ethan's manager, explaining that due to scheduling conflicts, they would have to cancel his performance. The sun was setting over the city as Ethan continued to practice, unaware of the forces working against him. The melody of Red Ribbon Promises drifted through the evening air, carrying with it all the love and longing he'd held onto since childhood. Outside his studio, fans swayed to the music, their phones recording snippets to share online, the very breadcrumbs that were leading Emma closer to finding him. The Morning Brew coffee shop was packed on Thursday evening, the usual crowd of regulars mixed with music lovers who had discovered Ethan's weekly performances. The warm scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries filled the air as Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding against her ribs. She hadn't planned to come here today. Her research had shown that Ethan performed every Thursday, but she'd told herself she needed more time to prepare, to find the right words. Yet here she was, drawn by an invisible thread that had always connected them. Ethan sat on a wooden stool at the front of the cafe, his guitar cradled in his lap. The red ribbon, though faded, was still tied to the neck of his instrument, and Emma's breath caught at the sight. He began to play, his fingers moving across the strings with practiced ease, and the melody that filled the room made her knees weak. It was their song, the simple tune they'd made up together under the oak tree, the one they'd hummed during endless summer afternoons. Ethan had transformed it into something deeper, more complex, but the heart of it remained the same. "This next song is called Summer Memories," Ethan announced softly into the microphone. "It's about childhood and promises that stay with us." Emma pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. She moved to a shadowy corner of the cafe, not ready to be seen. A waitress approached with a concerned look, but Emma just shook her head and ordered a tea she knew she wouldn't drink. The audience sat entranced as Ethan played. His music had always been beautiful, but there was something raw and honest in this performance that touched everyone in the room. An elderly couple held hands across their table. A young girl closed her eyes, swaying to the melody. When the song ended, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause began. Ethan ducked his head, a gesture so familiar it made Emma's heart ache. He'd always been shy about praise, even as a child. Emma rose from her seat, taking a step toward him, then another. Her hands trembled as she thought of all the years lost, all the letters he must have written that she never received. The weight of Sophie's confession pressed down on her shoulders. But before she could reach him, Ethan looked up. Their eyes met across the room, but there was no recognition in his gaze. Just a polite smile for another audience member, before he turned back to his guitar to begin another song. Emma stopped, her courage deserting her. How could she just walk up to him now, after all this time? What right did she have to disrupt the life he'd built without her? From her new position, she could see the way his fingers moved across the fretboard, the slight furrow in his brow as he concentrated. He looked different from the boy in her memories. Older, of course, with subtle traces of silver at his temples. But his gentleness remained unchanged. Ethan glanced her way again, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face. Something about the woman in the corner tugged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. He'd learned long ago not to trust such feelings. Besides, he had a show to finish. Emma watched him play 2 more songs before slipping quietly toward the exit. At the door, she paused for one last look. The soft cafe lighting caught the red ribbon on his guitar, making it glow like a beacon in the dimness. It was proof that some part of him still held on to their shared past, even if he didn't recognize her now. The door chimed softly as she stepped out into the evening air, leaving Ethan's music behind, but carrying the melody of their childhood song in her heart. Sophie's hands shook as she sealed the envelope. The weight of her past actions had become too heavy to bear, and she knew it was time to make things right. She had carefully written 2 letters, one for Emma and one for Ethan, each containing different pieces of the same puzzle. In Emma's letter, she had written in neat, anonymous handwriting, "If you want to find what you're looking for, come to Riverside Park this Saturday at 2 p.m., near the fountain where street musicians play." The letter to Ethan was simpler. "Your music touches hearts. Would you consider playing at Riverside Park this Saturday at 2 p.m.? Many would love to hear you perform." After mailing them, Sophie sat in her apartment, surrounded by old photographs from their childhood. One showed Emma and Ethan under their oak tree, their young faces bright with innocent joy. The sight of it made her stomach twist with renewed guilt. "I was so stupid," she whispered to the empty room. "So childishly jealous." She remembered how she'd felt at 13, watching Emma and Ethan's special bond from the sidelines. The way they seemed to have their own private world, one she could never be part of. That jealousy had festered until she'd done the unthinkable, forged that letter that tore them apart. Now, 15 years later, Sophie pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing her confession to Ethan. The words flowed easily, years of remorse spilling onto the page. "Dear Ethan," she wrote, "you don't know me, but I'm the reason you and Emma lost touch. I was young and jealous, and I did something terrible." She detailed everything, how she'd intercepted his letters, how she'd forged Emma's handwriting to break his heart, how she'd watched both their lives take separate paths because of her actions. By the time she finished, tears had smudged some of the ink. Meanwhile, across town, Emma sat at her kitchen table, reading the mysterious note for the 10th time. The paper was expensive, the handwriting unfamiliar. Something about it made her nervous, yet hopeful. "It could be nothing," she said aloud, running her finger along the edge of the paper. "Or it could be everything." She thought about Ethan at the coffee shop, how close she'd been to speaking to him, how his music still carried their childhood melody. The park mentioned in the letter was only a few blocks from there. It made sense he might play there. In his small apartment, Ethan read his own anonymous note. He'd received similar requests before. His local following had grown steadily over the years. Something about this one felt different, though, more significant. He picked up his guitar, the red ribbon still faithfully tied to its neck, and began to practice. The melody that came to his fingers was the one he'd played at the coffee shop. Their song, though he doubted Emma would ever know he'd kept it alive all these years. Sophie sealed her confession letter to Ethan in a separate envelope, planning to mail it after their meeting. She knew she was taking a risk arranging this reunion. They might both be angry when they discovered her involvement, but as she looked at the old photograph one more time, she knew it was worth it. "They deserve their chance," she whispered, touching the image of their young, smiling faces. "Even if it means they'll both hate me for what I did." She tucked the confession letter into her bag, deciding she would deliver it in person after watching their reunion from afar. It was time for all the secrets to come to light, whatever the consequences might be. The afternoon sun cast dappled shadows through the park's trees as Emma made her way toward the sound of a guitar. Her heart skipped when she saw him. Ethan, sitting on a wooden bench, his fingers dancing across the strings. The melody that floated through the air made her freeze mid-step. It was their song, the simple tune they'd made up together under the old oak tree, now transformed into something hauntingly beautiful by his skilled hands. Emma's eyes filled with tears as memories washed over her. Two children humming together, making up silly lyrics about clouds and butterflies. Several people had gathered to listen, but Ethan seemed lost in his own world, eyes closed as he played. The red ribbon, faded but still intact, was tied around his guitar neck. The sight of it made Emma's chest tighten. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer. Ethan's eyes opened at the movement, and their gazes met. His fingers stumbled on the strings for just a moment, but he kept playing, though his face had gone pale. Emma could see the questions in his eyes, the disbelief, the hurt, but also a glimmer of something else. Hope, maybe. She waited until he finished the song, the final notes hanging in the air between them. The small crowd applauded, but neither Emma nor Ethan seemed to notice. "You kept our song," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan's hands tightened on his guitar. "You remember it?" "I never forgot." Emma took another step closer. "I never forgot any of it, Ethan. The letters I wrote to you, did you not get them?" Confusion crossed his face. "Your letter said—" "I know about the forged letter now," Emma interrupted softly. Sophie confessed everything. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes, followed by a mix of pain and relief. He opened his mouth to respond, but a sharp voice cut through the moment. "Well, isn't this touching?" Ryan Mitchell stood a few feet away, his expensive suit out of place in the casual park setting. His face wore a sneer that made several onlookers step back. "So this is why you ended our engagement?" Ryan's voice carried across the space, drawing attention. "For some street musician?" Emma turned to face him, her shoulders straightening. "Ryan, please don't do this here." "Do what? Point out how quickly you moved on?" Ryan stepped closer, his presence intimidating. "Or maybe this started before you broke things off." "That's enough," Ethan said quietly, setting his guitar aside and standing up. Though his voice was calm, there was steel in it. Ryan laughed coldly. "The musician speaks. Tell me, did you know she was engaged when you started pursuing her?" "I didn't pursue anyone," Ethan replied evenly. "Emma and I knew each other long before you came into the picture." "Ryan," Emma's voice was firm now, "you need to leave. Whatever you think is happening here, you're wrong. Our engagement ended because we weren't right for each other, and you know it." "No." Ryan stepped even closer, his face flushed with anger. "Our engagement ended because you're still living in some childhood fantasy. Wake up, Emma. Do you really think this nobody can give you the life you deserve?" Park visitors were watching now, some with phones raised, others whispering among themselves. The peaceful afternoon had turned tense, the air thick with unspoken words and barely contained emotions. Ethan stood perfectly still, the red ribbon on his guitar fluttering in the breeze, a silent reminder of promises made long ago. Emma moved to stand beside him, her presence a clear statement that made Ryan's face darken further. Ethan turned away from the confrontation, his shoulders tense as he picked up his guitar and walked toward the winding park path. The red ribbon fluttered in the breeze, a painful reminder of innocent promises made so long ago. "Ethan, wait!" Emma called after him, her voice breaking. She hurried to catch up, leaving Ryan seething behind them. When she reached him, Ethan had stopped near a small pond, his hands gripping the guitar case so tight his knuckles were white. "I can't do this, Emma," he said softly, not turning to face her. "It's too much. Please." Emma stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Let me explain everything." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she continued. "Sophie forged that letter, Ethan. I never wanted to end things with you. I wrote to you every week for months, wondering why you never wrote back." Ethan finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled with years of hurt. "Sophie? Your cousin?" Emma nodded, wiping her tears with trembling hands. "She confessed everything to me recently. She was jealous of our connection, so she wrote that horrible letter saying I'd moved on. But I never stopped thinking about you, never stopped missing you. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting shifting shadows across their faces as they stood in silence. A gentle breeze carried the scent of nearby flowers, a stark contrast to the heavy emotions hanging between them. Why didn't you try harder? Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. When the letters stopped, why didn't you come find me? Call me? Anything? Emma's shoulders slumped. I was young and scared. When you stopped writing, I thought maybe you had moved on. Then life just happened. College, work, trying to please my parents. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with regret. But I never forgot you. Every word in my book was about you, about us. That red ribbon. She gestured to his guitar. I've dreamed about it so many times. Ethan's hand unconsciously moved to touch the faded ribbon. I kept it all these years, he admitted. Even when I thought you'd forgotten me, I couldn't let it go. I never forgot, Emma repeated firmly. How could I? You were my first friend, my first love, my first everything that mattered. She took a tentative step closer. The day I saw you at my book signing, something in my heart recognized you, but my mind couldn't piece it together. Now I understand why your music felt so familiar, why your presence made me feel like I was finally home. From a distance, Ryan watched their interaction with growing fury. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts with determined purpose. His fingers moved quickly as he typed out messages to music industry connections, setting his plan in motion. Nobody walked away from Ryan Mitchell, especially not for some small-time musician with a childhood fantasy. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, conflict clear on his face. I want to believe you, Emma. My heart wants to just forget everything and start over, but... He looked out over the pond, where ducks glided peacefully across the water. Those years were so dark, thinking you'd thrown away everything we had. I know, Emma said softly. I can't erase those years or the pain they caused. But I'm here now, telling you the truth. Everything I've accomplished, everything I've written, it all came from missing you, from loving you, even when I thought I'd lost you forever. The weight of their shared past and possible future hung between them as Ethan absorbed her words, his heart warring with the protective walls he'd built over the years. The next morning, Ethan's phone buzzed with a call from the venue manager. His face fell as he listened to the news, his fingers absently tracing the red ribbon on his guitar case. I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, the manager's voice wavered. We've had some legal complications. We have to cancel your performance tonight. Ethan sat heavily on his living room couch, his free hand clenching into a fist. But the tickets are sold out. People have been waiting for weeks. Our hands are tied. There's been a threat of litigation regarding safety protocols. The manager paused. Though strangely, these concerns only surfaced yesterday. As soon as the call ended, Ethan's phone lit up with notifications. Social media was exploding with disappointed fans sharing the news. Some had traveled from neighboring towns, booked hotels, taken time off work. Their messages of support touched him, but the weight of letting them down felt crushing. Emma discovered the cancellation while scrolling through her phone at a coffee shop. Her heart sank as she read the venue's official statement, but something about the timing felt suspicious. Then she saw Ryan's smug post about karma and everything clicked into place. She wouldn't let him win. Not this time. Emma spent the next few hours making calls, rallying Ethan's local fan base through social media. The response was overwhelming. People offered equipment, suggested alternative locations, and shared their stories of how Ethan's music had touched their lives. The park where they'd reunited seemed perfect. It had a natural amphitheater-like slope, plenty of space, and most importantly, it held meaning. Emma coordinated with local food truck owners who agreed to come, and fans volunteered to help with setup. When she arrived at Ethan's apartment that afternoon, he looked defeated. It's over, Emma. Maybe this is a sign that I should just stick to small cafes. Emma shook her head firmly. No, it's not over. Come with me. She held out her hand. Ethan hesitated. Where? Trust me, she said softly. Like we used to. The drive to the park was quiet, but as they turned the corner, Ethan's eyes widened. Dozens of people were setting up chairs and blankets on the grass. Someone had brought professional speakers, and fairy lights were being strung between trees. Food trucks lined the parking area, and a makeshift stage area had been created. "What is this?" Ethan whispered, taking in the scene. Emma turned to face him, her eyes bright with determination. "This is your real audience, Ethan. Not some fancy venue, not critics or industry people. These are the people who love your music, who connect with your story." He shook his head, uncertainty clear on his face. "I can't. This isn't just about your music," Emma said, reaching for his hand. "It's about showing everyone the love and resilience you put into every note. These people came because your songs speak to their hearts, just like they've always spoken to mine." A small group of fans noticed them and waved excitedly. Someone started chanting Ethan's name, and soon others joined in. The sound swelled across the park, full of encouragement and support. Ethan's fingers brushed against the red ribbon on his guitar case, and for the first time that day, a small smile tugged at his lips. "You organized all this?" Emma squeezed his hand. "We all did. Because we believe in you, in your music. Ryan can take away a venue, but he can't take away what matters most, the connection you have with people through your songs." The park transformed as the afternoon sun began its descent. Local businesses had strung twinkling lights between trees, creating a magical canopy that would illuminate the impromptu venue once darkness fell. Food truck owners arranged their vehicles in a welcoming semicircle, the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries wafting through the air. Volunteers set up borrowed folding chairs in neat rows, while others spread blankets across the grassy slope. Emma's heart swelled as she watched the community come together. A local sound equipment rental company had donated speakers and microphones, while the owner of the music store brought backup instruments and cables. Even Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop contributed, placing mason jars filled with wildflowers along the makeshift stage area. "I can't believe all these people came," Ethan murmured, watching from behind a large oak tree as more fans arrived. His fingers nervously played with the red ribbon tied to his guitar strap. "What if I disappoint them?" Emma turned to him, her eyes soft with understanding. "These people aren't here because they expect perfection. They're here because your music touches their hearts." A young couple walked past wearing t-shirts with hand-drawn versions of Ethan's guitar on them. An elderly man helped his wife set up a lawn chair, both of them wearing warm smiles. Teenagers huddled in small groups, phones ready to capture the moment. "But this isn't a proper venue," Ethan protested weakly. "There's no professional sound system, no—" "You don't just sing for the audience," Emma interrupted gently, placing her hand on his arm. "You sing for what matters, and I'll be right there in the front row, just like I should have been all these years." Ethan's eyes met hers and something shifted in his expression. He nodded slowly, squaring his shoulders as he adjusted his guitar strap. The crowd had grown to hundreds, their excited chatter filling the park. Phone cameras were already recording, live streaming the unusual scene to social media. Local news vans had appeared, drawn by the spontaneous gathering. As Ethan stepped onto the makeshift stage, a hush fell over the crowd. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, creating a natural spotlight. He approached the microphone, his red ribbon catching the last rays of sunlight. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "This isn't the venue we planned, but somehow, it feels more right than any stadium could." The crowd cheered and Ethan began to play. His first few songs were familiar favorites, and people sang along, their voices carrying across the park. Emma watched from the front row, tears glistening in her eyes as she witnessed the pure joy on his face. Between songs, Ethan paused, his fingers hovering over the strings. "I'd like to play something new," he announced. "Something I wrote a long time ago but never had the courage to perform." His eyes found Emma's in the crowd. "It's called Red Ribbon Promises." The opening notes were soft, gentle like a childhood memory. As Ethan began to sing about pinky promises and oak trees, about ribbons that tied hearts together across years and miles, phones lifted higher in the air, streaming the moment to thousands of viewers online. Emma's hand flew to her mouth as she recognized the melody. It was the tune they used to hum together as children, transformed into something both familiar and new. Around her, people swayed to the music, many wiping away tears as Ethan's voice carried the story of their childhood promise across the park. The song built to its chorus, and Ethan's voice grew stronger, more confident. His eyes never left Emma's as he sang about finding his way back to where his heart had always been. The morning after the successful concert, Ryan Mitchell paced in his luxurious office, his face contorted with rage as he watched yet another viral video of Ethan's performance. The view counter kept climbing, and the comment section overflowed with praise for both the music and the community spirit. "This isn't over," he muttered, jabbing furiously at his phone's screen. He began typing a series of calculated posts on social media, carefully crafting his words to cast doubt on Ethan's professionalism. "Sources say Hayes has a history of last-minute cancellations," he wrote from an anonymous account. "Unreliable and unprofessional. The venue manager had no choice but to cancel." More posts followed, each one designed to chip away at Ethan's reputation. Ryan used his business connections to spread the rumors further, calling in favors from industry contacts to question Ethan's reliability. But Sarah Chen, a local reporter who had covered the impromptu concert, noticed something odd about the timing of these accusations. With her journalist's instinct triggered, she began digging deeper. "The stories don't add up," she told her editor, spreading out her notes. "Hayes has a spotless record of performances. And why would the venue cancel at the last minute without any explanation?" Sarah interviewed local cafe owners where Ethan had performed, collecting glowing testimonials about his punctuality and professionalism. But it was her conversation with the venue manager that broke the case wide open. The manager, Tom Wilson, shifted uncomfortably in his seat during their interview. I can't say much," he stammered, his eyes darting around nervously. "Mr. Wilson," Sarah leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Several small businesses lost money because of the cancellation. Don't they deserve to know the truth?" Tom's resolve crumbled. He revealed how Ryan had threatened to tie up the venue in expensive litigation if they allowed Ethan to perform. "He said he'd bury us in legal fees," Tom admitted, his voice shaking. "I couldn't risk it. The venue's barely staying afloat as it is." Sarah's expose hit the local news the next morning. "Local businessman exposed. The truth behind Hayes' concert cancellation" ran across headlines. The article detailed Ryan's manipulation, threats, and subsequent smear campaign. The story spread like wildfire across social media. Ryan's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as business partners distanced themselves and clients canceled contracts. His carefully cultivated reputation crumbled within hours. In his office, Ryan watched his empire falling apart. Computer screens displayed plummeting stock prices and a flood of negative press. His assistant's voice crackled over the intercom, listing the growing number of clients demanding to terminate their contracts. "This is all your fault," he snarled, staring at Emma's photo on his phone. She stood smiling next to Ethan at the park concert, their happiness a stark contrast to his current situation. "You ruined everything I built." He furiously typed out a message to Emma. "You think this is over? You haven't seen anything yet." His finger hovered over the send button, but before he could press it, his lawyer called. "Mitchell, don't do anything stupid," his lawyer warned. "You're already facing potential legal consequences. Any threats now will only make things worse." Ryan deleted the message, but his eyes burned with hatred as he watched another video of Emma and Ethan performing together go viral. He grabbed his coat and stormed out of the office, ignoring the reporters gathered in the lobby. "This isn't the end," he muttered as he slipped into his car, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I'll make them both pay for this." Sophie Carter sat at her desk, her hands trembling as she typed out the social media post that would change everything. The morning light filtered through her window, casting a soft glow on her tear-stained face. She took a deep breath and began writing. "To Ethan Hayes, Emma Carter, and everyone who follows their story. I need to confess something that has weighed on my heart for years. When we were teenagers, I forged a letter to Ethan, pretending to be Emma, telling him she had moved on. That single act of jealousy tore apart two people who truly loved each other. I was young, insecure, and deeply wrong. The pain I caused has haunted me every day since. Her finger hovered over the post button for several seconds before she finally pressed it. Within minutes, notifications began flooding her phone. Comments ranged from harsh criticism to messages of understanding and support. "How could you be so cruel?" one person wrote. "It takes courage to admit your mistakes," another responded. "They lost years because of you. Everyone deserves a second chance." The reactions kept pouring in, each ping of her phone making Sophie's heart race faster. She watched as the post began to spread, shared by hundreds, then thousands of people. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon her confession became the talk of the town. Emma was the first to reach out. Her message was simple but powerful. "Thank you for telling the truth. It must have been hard." Later that afternoon, Sophie received a call from Ethan. Her hands shook as she answered the phone, expecting anger or resentment. Instead, his voice was calm and gentle. "I read your post," he said softly. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." Sophie's voice cracked. "I know I can never make up for the years I stole from you both." There was a pause before Ethan responded. "You know, I've spent years writing songs about hurt and betrayal. But lately, I've been thinking about forgiveness too." He took a deep breath. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can make the future brighter." Sophie couldn't hold back her tears. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Maybe not," Ethan replied. "But holding on to anger won't give us back those years either." The next day, Sophie threw herself into making amends. She contacted her connections in the publishing industry, using her experience as a literary agent to help promote Emma's book. She arranged interviews, book readings, and social media campaigns that highlighted both Emma's writing and its connection to Ethan's music. She created a dedicated social media account that shared updates about Ethan's performances and Emma's book tours. With each post, she included personal stories about their childhood together, helping fans understand the depth of their connection. "Their love story isn't just about romance," she wrote in one popular post. "It's about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of staying true to yourself. I nearly destroyed that story, but watching them rebuild it has taught me more about love than I ever knew." Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Emma invited her to help coordinate her upcoming book signing events, while Ethan asked her to help manage his social media presence. Working together, they began turning their story of separation and reunion into a message of hope for others. The online community that had initially been divided about Sophie's confession began to warm to her genuine efforts to make things right. Her original confession post became a testament to the power of honesty and redemption, shared by people around the world who had their own stories of forgiveness to tell. The spring morning dawned crisp and clear as Ethan and Emma walked along the familiar country path. Their footsteps fell into an easy rhythm, much like when they were children racing to their favorite spot. The old oak tree stood exactly as they remembered it, its massive branches reaching toward the sky like welcoming arms. Emma's heart fluttered as they approached. "It hasn't changed at all," she whispered, reaching out to touch the rough bark. Her fingers traced the spot where they had carved their initials so many years ago. Ethan stood beside her, his presence warm and steady. "I used to come here almost every day after you left," he admitted, his voice soft with memory. "It was the only place I felt close to you." They settled at the base of the tree, where wildflowers dotted the grass with splashes of yellow and purple. Emma watched as Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather pouch. "I kept everything," he said, carefully opening it. Inside were dozens of folded papers, each one yellowed with age but clearly handled with care. "Every letter you sent before." His voice trailed off, but Emma understood. With trembling hands, she unfolded one of the letters. Her childish handwriting filled the page, describing her new school, how much she missed him, and her dreams of coming back home. Tears welled in her eyes as she read her own words. I promise I'll never forget our oak tree and our promise. And this, Ethan continued, pulling something else from the pouch. The red ribbon, faded but intact, lay across his palm. I couldn't let it go, even when I thought you had forgotten about me. Emma's tears fell freely now. I should have known something was wrong when your letters stopped coming. I should have tried harder to find you, to understand what happened. Her voice broke. I let you think I'd forgotten our promise. Ethan's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers naturally, as if they'd never been apart. We were just kids, Emma. Neither of us could have known what Sophie would do. But all those years? Emma's shoulders shook with quiet sobs. All the moments we missed, the dreams we had. Hey, Ethan said softly, turning to face her. His free hand gently wiped away her tears. Look at where we are now, right here, under our tree. Maybe we lost years, but we still have forever. Emma looked up at him through tear-filled eyes. You really believe that? After everything? I do. He pulled the ribbon from his palm and carefully tied it around their joined hands. This ribbon brought us back together, just like you said it would. It just took a little longer than we planned. The sunlight filtered through the oak leaves above them, creating dancing patterns on their faces. Emma leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The familiar scent of pine and earth surrounded them, bringing back countless memories of summer days spent planning their future under these very branches. I wrote about this place every day in my diary, Emma confessed. I was so afraid I'd forget how it felt to sit here with you, how safe and perfect everything seemed. Ethan squeezed her hand. It still feels that way to me, he said quietly. Like nothing in the world can touch us here. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the branches sway gently in the breeze, their joined hands still wrapped in the red ribbon that had carried their promise through all the years apart. Emma sat at her desk, surrounded by scattered papers filled with Ethan's song lyrics. Her laptop screen glowed with the first draft of their story, words flowing naturally as she wove their shared memories together. The soft strumming of Ethan's guitar drifted through her open office door, creating the perfect backdrop for her writing. What about this part? Ethan called out, pausing his melody. He walked into the room, guitar still cradled in his arms. I was thinking we could match the chapter about the oak tree with the song I wrote last summer. Emma turned in her chair, her eyes bright with excitement. The one about promises and time? She shuffled through the papers until she found his handwritten lyrics. It's perfect, Ethan. The words capture exactly how it felt back then. Ethan settled into the armchair beside her desk, absently strumming soft chords. It's strange, isn't it? How all those songs I wrote when I was missing you now have a completely different meaning. They're not just about loss anymore, Emma said softly, reaching out to touch his hand. They're about finding our way back. A gentle knock on the doorframe interrupted their moment. Sophie stood there, holding a tablet, her expression hopeful but hesitant. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to show you something. Emma gestured for her cousin to enter. Come in, Sophie. What have you got? Sophie's marketing expertise showed in the professional presentation she pulled up. I've been working on some promotional ideas for the book and album. She swiped through several mock-ups of cover designs, each one incorporating both their artistic styles. I thought we could create a social media campaign that shares snippets of your story alongside previews of Ethan's music. Ethan leaned forward, studying the designs. His initial wariness of Sophie had gradually softened as he witnessed her genuine efforts to make amends. These are really good, Sophie. I especially like how you've incorporated the red ribbon theme. Sophie's face lit up at the praise. I also started a hashtag campaign last night just to test the waters. She pulled up several social media posts. Your fans are already going crazy over the idea of this collaboration. Look at these comments. Emma scrolled through the responses, her eyes widening. Their followers were sharing their own stories of lost and found love, connecting deeply with their journey. This is incredible, she breathed. Our story is touching so many people. That's what good music and writing does, Ethan said, playing a few notes that perfectly matched the mood in the room. It helps people feel less alone in their own experiences. Sophie set down her tablet, her voice growing serious. I know I can never fully make up for what I did, but I want to help share your story with the world. It's a reminder that love can survive anything, even foolish mistakes made by jealous cousins. Emma stood and hugged her cousin tightly. You're part of this story too, Sophie. Your confession helped bring us back together. Ethan nodded in agreement. And now you're helping us tell our story the right way. He started playing the melody of their oak tree song, the notes filling the room with warmth. Emma returned to her desk, fingers hovering over her keyboard. I think we should include it all, the good and the bad, the separation, the misunderstandings, and the reunion. Show people that real love stories aren't always perfect, but they're worth fighting for. Sophie began organizing the scattered papers, creating neat piles of lyrics and chapters. Your fans already love you both separately. Together, you're going to create something unforgettable. The afternoon sun streamed through the window as they worked, Emma typing, Ethan playing, and Sophie planning. Their creative energies flowed together naturally, healing old wounds and building something new from the pieces of their past. The small town square buzzed with excitement as people gathered for Ethan's tribute concert. Strings of twinkling lights crisscrossed overhead, and the old oak tree stood majestically at the center, its branches now adorned with hundreds of red ribbons that fluttered in the gentle evening breeze. Ethan stood backstage, watching through a gap in the curtain as more townspeople arrived. His fingers absently touched the faded red ribbon he still wore on his wrist. I can't believe they did all this, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Emma squeezed his hand. You touched so many lives with your music, Ethan. They want to celebrate not just your success, but what you represent to them. The mayor stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special evening honoring our very own Ethan Hayes. The crowd erupted in applause. But before we hear from Ethan, someone else would like to say a few words. Please welcome Emma Carter. Emma walked onto the stage, her heart pounding. The lights illuminated her face as she looked out at the sea of familiar and new faces. Sophie gave her an encouraging thumbs up from the front row. 20 years ago, right under that oak tree, Emma began, pointing to the ribbon-decorated tree. A little girl made a promise to a little boy. It wasn't just any promise. It was a promise of forever. Her voice carried across the hushed crowd. Life took us in different directions, but that promise never truly broke. It lived in Ethan's music, in my writing, and in that old oak tree that watched over our childhood dreams. Tears glistened in her eyes as she continued. Every song Ethan wrote, even during our years apart, carried the echo of that promise. And now, looking at all of you here tonight, seeing the red ribbons you've added to our tree, I realize that our story has become more than just ours. It belongs to everyone who's ever believed in second chances and the power of love to find its way home. The audience responded with warm applause, many wiping away tears. Some held up their own red ribbons, ready to add them to the tree. Ethan stepped onto the stage, guitar in hand, and the crowd's cheers grew louder. He hugged Emma before she could leave the stage. Stay, he whispered. This first song is for you. For us. As Ethan began to play, his fingers dancing across the strings, the melody of their childhood song filled the square. Emma sat on a stool beside him, watching as the audience swayed to the music. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders, elderly couples held hands, and teenagers recorded the performance on their phones, sharing the moment with the world. Sophie moved through the crowd, capturing photographs of the scene, the illuminated oak tree with its dancing ribbons, the spellbound audience, and most importantly, the way Ethan and Emma looked at each other as the music played. Between songs, people approached the oak tree, tying their own red ribbons to its branches. Each ribbon carried a note, some with wishes, others with their own love stories, all inspired by Ethan and Emma's journey. The tree transformed into a living testament to the power of enduring love and the strength of community. The evening air filled with music, Laughter and stories as townspeople shared their memories of young Ethan and Emma playing under the oak tree. Their story had woven itself into the fabric of the town, becoming a symbol of hope and resilience that touched everyone present. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Ethan's home studio as he and Emma sat surrounded by scattered papers, notebooks, and guitar picks. Emma's laptop displayed the latest draft of their book, while Ethan's acoustic guitar rested against the worn leather armchair. "Listen to this melody," Ethan said, picking up his guitar. His fingers moved across the strings, playing a gentle tune that seemed to dance with the words Emma had written. "I think it captures that moment when we first made our promise." Emma closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. "It's perfect, Ethan. Like you reached into my memories and turned them into sound." Their work on The Boy with the Red Ribbon had consumed their days, but neither minded. The project had become more than just a book or an album. It was their way of healing, of understanding their shared past through each other's perspectives. 3 publishers called today, Emma mentioned, scrolling through her emails. "They're interested in the concept of combining the book with your music. They say it's unique, a story that readers can both read and hear." Ethan nodded, still strumming softly. "My producer says the same thing. He thinks the songs could stand alone as an album, but together with your words, they tell a complete story." Later that afternoon, Ethan drove them through familiar streets in his old pickup truck. He pointed out places that held special meaning: the ice cream shop where he'd written his first song, the local radio station that had first played his music, the creek where he used to sit and think about Emma. "This is where I came when I felt lost," he explained, parking near the creek. The water bubbled peacefully over smooth stones. "I'd sit here for hours playing my guitar, wondering if you ever thought about me too." Emma's heart ached at his words. "I thought about you every day," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to find my way back." As evening approached, they made their way to the oak tree. The red ribbons from the tribute concert still decorated its branches, though fewer now, weathered by rain and wind. Emma pulled out her notebook, her hands trembling slightly. "I want to share something with you," she said, settling beside him on the grass. "It's a chapter I wrote last night. It's about the day I found out about Sophie's letter." Ethan turned to face her, his expression soft and attentive. Emma's voice quivered as she began to read. "The truth felt like 1,000 paper cuts to my heart. Every letter I thought you hadn't answered, every silence I had misunderstood, every moment we lost. They weren't fate's cruel joke, but the result of betrayal. I stood in my apartment staring at old photographs, wondering how many times you had reached out while I remained blind to your attempts. The weight of lost years crashed over me like waves, each one carrying memories of what could have been. I had let a forged letter steal our story, and no amount of writing could fill the chapters we had missed." Ethan's eyes glistened as he listened. Emma's voice grew stronger as she continued. "But paper can burn, and from its ashes new stories can rise. The red ribbon may have faded, but the promise it represented never truly died. It lived in every song you wrote, in every word I penned, in every dream that refused to fade. Some promises are written not in ink or tied with ribbon, but etched into the very essence of who we are." When she finished reading, silence fell between them. Ethan reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. His other hand touched the red ribbon on his wrist, its color soft from years of wear. "Your words," he said quietly. "They make the music in my head make sense." Ryan Mitchell sat in his dimly lit office, scrolling through social media feeds filled with news about Ethan and Emma's successful collaboration. His fingers trembled with rage as he typed out an anonymous tip to several entertainment bloggers. "Exclusive: Emma Carter's childhood romance story exposed as publicity stunt." Within hours, the rumor spread like wildfire. Headlines questioned the authenticity of their story, citing unnamed sources close to the situation. Some outlets even suggested Emma had fabricated her connection to Ethan to boost book sales. Ethan first saw the accusations while checking his phone between recording sessions. His stomach twisted as he read article after article questioning everything he and Emma had rebuilt. Though he tried to dismiss the doubts, they crept into his mind like poison. When Emma arrived at the studio that afternoon, she found Ethan sitting alone, his guitar untouched beside him. The tension in the room was palpable. "Is everything okay?" she asked, setting down her laptop bag. Ethan's voice was quiet but strained. "Did you see the articles?" "I did." Emma's hands clenched into fists. "Ryan's behind this. It has to be." "How can you be so sure?" Ethan stood up, pacing the room. "These sources, they're saying things that make sense. Your book sales increased after we reconnected. The timing of everything?" Emma's face paled. "You can't seriously believe that." "I don't know what to believe anymore." Ethan's voice cracked. "Everything happened so fast. The book, the music, the publicity. Maybe I wanted to believe in our story so badly that I didn't question it enough." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "Question it?" "Ethan, I have the letters you wrote. I have pictures of us as children. I have this." She pulled out an old, faded photograph of them under the oak tree. "But more than that, I have every moment we've shared etched in my heart." "Hearts can be deceived," Ethan said softly, though his resolve was weakening. Emma stepped closer to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "You want to know if this is real? Listen to me, Ethan Hayes. You're not just my inspiration. You're my everything. Every word I've written, every story I've told, they all lead back to you. To that little boy who held my hand under the oak tree and promised forever." She reached for his wrist, touching the red ribbon he still wore. "This isn't about publicity or book sales. It's about two kids who made a promise. And despite everything life threw at us, despite Sophie's letter, despite Ryan's schemes, that promise never truly broke." Ethan's eyes met hers, seeing the pure truth in them. The doubt that had clouded his mind began to clear. "I'm sorry," he whispered, pulling her into an embrace. "I let his lies get to me. I should have known better." Emma held him tightly. "We've lost too much time to let Ryan steal more from us." "No more doubts," Ethan declared, wiping away her tears. "Whatever he throws at us, we face it together. Our story is real, and no one can take that away." They stood there in the studio, holding each other, while outside, Ryan's lies continued to circulate. But they knew the truth would prevail. Their love wasn't crafted for publicity or sales. It was written in childhood promises, preserved in a red ribbon, and proven in every moment they shared. The morning of the interview, Ethan and Emma sat together in the green room of the local news station. Emma smoothed her navy blue dress for the 10th time while Ethan adjusted his guitar strap. "Are you nervous?" she asked, watching him tune the strings with practiced care. "A little," he admitted, "but having you here makes it easier." The studio lights were bright as they settled into their seats across from Sarah Chen, a respected journalist known for her fair reporting. The red on-air light blinked to life, and Sarah's warm smile put them at ease. "Today we're joined by musician Ethan Hayes and author Emma Carter to discuss their upcoming collaboration and address recent controversies," Sarah began. "Thank you both for being here." Emma's hand found Ethan's, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Thank you for having us," she replied. "Let's start at the beginning," Sarah suggested. "There have been accusations that your childhood connection was fabricated for publicity. How do you respond to these claims?" Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he carefully extracted a faded photograph. "This is us at 3 years old," he said, his voice steady. "Under the oak tree where we first met." The camera zoomed in on the image. 2 small children, their faces bright with innocent joy, standing beneath sprawling branches. "And this," Emma added, opening her purse, "is every letter Ethan wrote to me before we lost touch." She placed a bundle of carefully preserved envelopes on the table, each one signed with his distinctive left-handed slant that he still has today. Sarah examined the letters, noting the postmarks from years ago. "These are quite compelling," she observed. "Our story isn't perfect," Ethan continued, his thumb brushing over Emma's knuckles. "We lost years because of misunderstandings and interference. But that makes it more real, not less." Emma nodded, her eyes shining. "We're not claiming some fairy tale romance. We're sharing a story about hope, about how love can survive time and distance and even deliberate attempts to break it. As if on cue, Ethan picked up his guitar. This song was in my heart long before Emma's book became successful. I'd like to share it, if I may. Sarah gestured encouragingly, and Ethan began to play. The melody was simple but haunting, a tune that spoke of waiting and longing. When he sang, his voice carried years of emotion. Red ribbon fading, but the promise stays true. Under the oak tree, I'm still waiting for you. In the studio, crew members wiped away tears. Sarah's professional demeanor softened as she listened. When the last note faded, there was a moment of reverent silence. That was beautiful, Sarah said softly, and clearly very personal. Every word comes from our real experiences, Emma explained. The red ribbon Ethan sings about? She gestured to his wrist, where the faded fabric still rested. It's right there, worn every day since we were children. Social media exploded with support during the broadcast. Ethan and Emma began trending, with fans sharing their own stories of love overcoming obstacles. Screenshots of Ryan Mitchell's attempted smear campaign were met with dismissal and criticism. By the time the interview ended, the truth of their connection was undeniable. Ryan Mitchell's accusations crumbled in the face of their authentic emotion and tangible evidence. Reports emerged that he had been seen leaving town, his reputation in tatters. As they left the studio, Ethan and Emma were greeted by a small crowd of supporters. Some held red ribbons, others clutched copies of Emma's book or Ethan's albums. Their love story had touched hearts and inspired others to believe in the power of enduring love. Sophie Carter sat in her modern office, surrounded by marketing materials and social media analytics for the boy with the red ribbon. Her desk, once cluttered with remnants of her past mistakes, now displayed promising statistics and positive feedback from major publishing houses. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another publisher was interested. This time, it was Henderson & Blake, one of the industry's most prestigious names. Sophie's hands trembled as she read the email, her eyes growing wide at the proposed advance figures. "This could change everything," she whispered to herself, quickly dialing Emma's number. Within an hour, Emma and Ethan arrived at Sophie's office. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow over their faces as Sophie presented the offer. "They want to do a full multimedia release," Sophie explained, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The book, an accompanying album of Ethan's songs, and a documentary about your journey." Emma's eyes sparkled with tears. "Sophie, this is incredible. How did you manage this?" "I've been working every connection I have," Sophie admitted, shuffling through her presentation papers. "But honestly, your story sells itself. I just made sure the right people saw it." Ethan studied Sophie's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the coffee cups littering her desk. "You've been working non-stop on this, haven't you?" Sophie's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "I needed to make things right," she said, her voice catching. "After what I did—" "Sophie," Ethan interrupted gently, pulling up a chair beside her desk. "We need to talk about that." Emma sensed the moment and excused herself, saying she needed to make some calls about the offer. In the quiet office, Sophie finally faced the conversation she'd been avoiding. "I was so jealous," she confessed, tears welling in her eyes. "Emma had everything. Talent, beauty, your love. I felt invisible beside her." Ethan listened patiently as Sophie continued. "Every time I saw that red ribbon on your wrist, it reminded me that I would never have a connection like that with anyone. It ate at me until I convinced myself that destroying your relationship would somehow make me feel better." "And did it?" Ethan asked softly. "No." Sophie shook her head. "It made everything worse. But working on this project, using my skills to help others instead of hurting them, it's shown me that I have value too." Ethan reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "Your journey matters too, Sophie. You've turned your regret into something beautiful. That takes real courage." Sophie wiped her eyes, managing a small smile. "I've been thinking about starting a marketing agency specifically for artists and writers who need help getting their work noticed. People who have beautiful stories but don't know how to share them with the world. That sounds perfect for you, Ethan said warmly. You've got a gift for seeing potential in things, Sophie. Maybe that letter wasn't your finest moment, but look at what you've done since then. Emma returned to find them sharing a genuine laugh. The tension that had lingered between them for months finally dissolved, replaced by understanding and forgiveness. Henderson and Blake wants to meet next week, Emma announced excitedly. Sophie, they specifically requested that you be there as our marketing director. Sophie's eyes widened. Really? Really, Emma confirmed. You're part of this story too now. Not as the villain, but as someone who proved that people can change. Sophie looked at her computer screen, where dozens of emails from other creative artists seeking her help waited in her inbox. She realized that by helping Emma and Ethan share their story, she had finally found her own path to redemption and purpose. The late afternoon sun cast golden rays through the branches of the old oak tree, now transformed into a stunning display of love and hope. Hundreds of red ribbons fluttered in the gentle breeze, each one tied with care by community members and fans who believed in Ethan and Emma's story. The townspeople had gathered secretly for weeks planning this celebration. Tables laden with homemade treats circled the tree, and fairy lights twinkled among the branches, ready to illuminate the evening ahead. Hand-painted banners celebrating the boy with the red ribbon hung between trees, their letters sparkling with glitter. When Ethan and Emma arrived, supposedly for a simple photo shoot, they stopped in their tracks. Emma's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Ethan squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening as he took in the scene before them. Surprise! The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, beaming with pride. This tree has been watching over our town for generations, he announced, but never has it witnessed a love story quite like yours. As the celebration continued, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes made her way through the crowd. She carried herself with the dignified grace that comes with age, her walking stick tapping gently against the ground. I'm Martha Reynolds, she said, approaching Ethan and Emma. I've lived across from this park for 67 years. Her eyes twinkled as she settled into a chair the townspeople quickly provided. I remember you two, Martha continued, her voice warm with nostalgia. I used to watch you from my kitchen window while I did the dishes. 2 little children playing under this very tree. Emma leaned forward, intrigued. You saw us back then? Martha nodded, smiling. Oh yes, I remember one day particularly well. You were both about 3 or 4. This little girl, she gestured to Emma, marched right up to this shy boy and declared they would get married someday. The crowd gathered closer, entranced by Martha's story. Ethan's cheeks flushed slightly as he remembered that moment. I thought to myself then, Martha continued, her voice growing soft with emotion, there's something special about these two. The way you looked at each other, even as children. It was pure magic. She reached out and patted their joined hands. Every day after that, I'd watch you play here. And when you left, she looked at Emma. I saw this young man come here alone, holding that red ribbon like it was his most precious possession. Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks as she listened. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Now look at you both. Martha gestured to the celebrating crowd, the ribboned tree, and the banners announcing their success. Your love story has touched so many hearts, inspired so many people. But for me, I'll always remember those 2 little children who knew somehow that they were meant to be together. Ethan helped Emma to her feet, and together they faced the gathered crowd. This tree, Ethan began, his voice thick with emotion, has been more than just a meeting place. It's been our anchor, our reminder of what matters most. The promise we made here as children, Emma added, wiping away tears, seemed so simple then. We didn't know about the challenges ahead, the years we'd spend apart. But somehow, that promise kept us connected. They looked up at the hundreds of red ribbons dancing in the breeze, each one representing someone who believed in their story. The setting sun painted the scene in shades of gold and pink, making the ribbons glow like flames against the darkening sky. We promise, they said together, to never forget our roots, this community, and the power of a promise made under this old oak tree. The grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of fans, journalists, and industry professionals gathered for the official launch of The Boy with the Red Ribbon. The stage was elegantly decorated with soft lighting and, of course, delicate red ribbons that caught the light just so. Emma sat in the front row, her heart racing as Ethan took the stage with his guitar. He looked handsome in his dark blue suit, but what struck her most was the genuine smile that lit up his face, the same smile she remembered from their childhood days. "This next song," Ethan spoke into the microphone, his voice gentle but clear, "is called Finding Home. I wrote it the night Emma came back into my life." He touched the faded red ribbon that was still tied around his wrist. "Sometimes the best things in life take the longest to find their way back to us." The melody started soft and sweet, building into something powerful and moving. Ethan's voice carried years of longing, hope, and finally, joy. The audience sat transfixed, many wiping away tears as he sang about a love that survived time, distance, and misunderstandings. When the last note faded, the room erupted in applause. Emma couldn't hold back her tears as Ethan reached down to help her onto the stage. She clutched her copy of their book, its cover showing a beautifully illustrated oak tree with a single red ribbon tied to its lowest branch. "The critics have called this book a masterpiece of hope," the host announced, reading from a review. "They say it's not just a love story but a testament to the power of believing in something bigger than ourselves." Emma stepped up to the podium, opening the book to a marked page. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to read. "Sometimes destiny doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it's as quiet as a child's promise, as simple as a red ribbon tied with clumsy fingers. But once it takes root in your heart, it grows stronger with every passing season, every missed chance, every silent prayer. And when it finally blooms, you realize that every tear, every moment of doubt was just water helping that seed of hope grow." The audience sat in rapt attention as she continued reading, describing the moment she first saw Ethan again at the park. Her words painted a vivid picture of two souls finding their way back to each other, of love that refused to be forgotten. Backstage after the event, Emma and Ethan found a quiet moment away from the crowds. They sat on a plush sofa, their book resting between them, Ethan's guitar leaning against the wall nearby. The sound of the continuing celebration filtered through the closed door, but here it was just the two of them. "Did you ever imagine this?" Emma asked, running her fingers over the book's cover. "When we were kids playing under that oak tree?" Ethan shook his head, smiling. "Never. But then again, I never imagined losing you either." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "All those years I kept writing songs about you, even when I thought I'd never see you again." "And I kept writing about the boy with the red ribbon," Emma replied softly, "even when I didn't know if you still had it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, letting the reality of their success sink in. Their story had touched thousands of hearts, their music and words reaching people across the country. But here, in this quiet moment, they were just Emma and Ethan, two hearts that found their way back to each other. "This isn't the end of our story," Ethan said, squeezing her hand gently. "It's just the beginning." The evening air was crisp and sweet as Ethan led Emma down the familiar path to their oak tree. Stars were just beginning to peek through the darkening sky, twinkling like tiny diamonds scattered across velvet. The ancient oak stood majestically before them, its branches spread wide as if welcoming them home. Emma noticed Ethan seemed unusually quiet, his hand holding hers just a little tighter than usual. The red ribbon that had been his constant companion for all these years was still tied around his wrist, faded but intact, a testament to their enduring connection. "Remember when we first met here?" Ethan asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes reflected the last remnants of sunset as he gazed at the massive trunk of the oak tree. Emma smiled, touching the rough bark with her free hand. "Of course. I was the bold little girl who walked right up to you and declared we should get married." "You were fearless," Ethan chuckled, pulling her closer. "And I was the shy boy who could barely speak, but knew in his heart that you were special." The evening breeze rustled through the leaves above them, creating a gentle symphony that seemed to echo their beating hearts. Ethan slowly began to untie the red ribbon from his wrist, handling it with the care one might give to the most precious of treasures. "This ribbon," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "has been my compass for all these years. Even when I thought I'd lost you forever, it reminded me that true love exists." His hands trembled slightly as he held the ribbon between them. "It brought us back together when everything seemed impossible." Emma's breath caught in her throat as Ethan lowered himself to one knee. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if they too were bearing witness to this moment. "Emma Carter," he said, looking up at her with eyes full of love and certainty. "This ribbon has been more than just a piece of fabric. It's been hope, it's been memory, it's been promise." His fingers moved with gentle precision as he began to wrap the ribbon around her ring finger. "This ribbon brought us back together. Now let it bind us forever." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks as she watched him create a perfect bow around her finger. The faded red ribbon, worn soft by years of faithful wearing, now rested where a ring would sit. It was more precious to her than any diamond could ever be. "Will you marry me, Emma?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying all the love and longing of their years apart and all the joy of their reunion. Emma's voice trembled as she answered, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." She dropped to her knees beside him, throwing her arms around his neck as happy tears flowed freely. They held each other under the spreading branches of their oak tree, their laughter and tears mingling in the growing darkness. The stars twinkled above them, silent witnesses to their joy, just as this tree had been witness to their first childhood promise. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the town the next day, bringing smiles to everyone who heard it. The local coffee shop put up a congratulatory sign, and their social media accounts were flooded with messages of joy and support from fans who had followed their journey through their book and music. But that moment under the oak tree remained perfectly theirs, a private celebration of a love that had survived time, distance, and fate itself. The red ribbon around Emma's finger told their story better than words ever could, a story of promise, perseverance, and the triumph of true love. The town square buzzed with excitement as strings of twinkling lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a warm glow on the gathering below. The old oak tree, now adorned with hundreds of red ribbons and soft white lights, stood as a majestic centerpiece to the celebration. Townspeople had been working since dawn to transform the space into a magical setting worthy of Ethan and Emma's engagement party. Tables draped in white linens dotted the square, each decorated with mason jars filled with wildflowers and floating candles. The aroma of home-cooked dishes wafted through the air as neighbors brought their favorite recipes to share. Mrs. Anderson's famous apple pie sat proudly next to Mr. Thompson's secret recipe barbecue, creating a feast that represented the whole community's love. When Ethan and Emma arrived hand in hand, the crowd erupted in cheerful applause. Emma's eyes glistened with tears as she took in the scene, the decorated oak tree, the familiar faces, and the overwhelming show of support from their community. The red ribbon still adorned her finger, a simple but meaningful engagement symbol that caught the light as she waved to their guests. Sophie Carter stood near the front, nervously clutching a champagne glass. When the time came for speeches, she stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. The crowd hushed as she cleared her throat. "I never thought I'd be standing here," Sophie began, her voice thick with emotion. "Years ago, I made a terrible mistake that could have destroyed something beautiful." She paused, looking directly at Emma and Ethan. "But you two taught me something incredible about forgiveness. You showed me that love isn't just about the good times, it's about healing, growing, and giving second chances." Tears rolled down Sophie's cheeks as she continued, "Emma, you're more than my cousin. You're my sister in every way that matters. And Ethan, your capacity for forgiveness humbles me. Thank you both for showing me what true love looks like." The crowd wiped away tears as Sophie raised her glass. "To Emma and Ethan, may your love story continue to inspire us all." After the toast, the town mayor stepped forward with a surprise. In his hands, he held an ornate wooden box, a time capsule crafted by the local woodworker. One by one, townspeople came forward to add their contributions. a photograph of young Emma and Ethan under the oak tree, pressed flowers from the park where they reunited, sheet music from Ethan's first song about Emma, and a copy of their book, The Boy with the Red Ribbon. "This represents not just your past," the mayor explained, "but the journey that brought you here. We'll keep it safe until your wedding day." As evening settled in, soft music began to play. Ethan led Emma to the center of the square, beneath the canopy of lights. He pulled her close as they swayed to the melody, their shadows dancing on the ground beneath them. The oak tree's illuminated branches created a natural cathedral above them, red ribbons fluttering in the gentle breeze like whispered blessings. Around them, couples joined in the dance, young and old, friends and family, all celebrating the power of enduring love. Mrs. Wilson, who had taught both Emma and Ethan in 3rd grade, dabbed at her eyes as she watched them dance. "I always knew," she whispered to her husband. "Even when they were children, I knew their hearts belonged together." The lights twinkled overhead like earthbound stars, and the music wrapped around them like a warm embrace. In that moment, surrounded by the love of their community, Ethan and Emma's world felt perfectly complete. The red ribbons on the oak tree danced in the evening breeze, each one representing a prayer, a wish, and a blessing for their future together. Letters filled every surface of Emma and Ethan's shared office. Handwritten notes, typed pages, and colorful cards spread across their desk like a patchwork quilt of shared stories. Emma held one particularly touching letter, her fingers trembling as she read aloud to Ethan. "Your story helped me reconnect with my childhood sweetheart after 30 years apart," she read, her voice soft with emotion. "Like you, we let circumstances tear us apart. But after reading about your red ribbon, I found the courage to reach out. We're meeting for coffee next week." Ethan sat beside her, gently strumming his guitar. His eyes were fixed on Emma's face as she shared another message. "Here's one from a young musician in Seattle. Your music gave me the strength to keep playing when I wanted to give up. Now I'm teaching guitar to kids in my neighborhood." The impact of their story had spread far beyond what they'd imagined. The boy with the red ribbon had touched hearts across the country, inspiring people to chase their dreams and mend broken relationships. Each letter represented a life changed, a connection restored, or a creative spark ignited. Sophie knocked on their office door, carrying a stack of financial reports. Her face glowed with excitement as she entered. "The book sales are incredible," she announced, setting down the papers. "And the streaming numbers for the album are breaking records." Emma and Ethan exchanged meaningful looks. They'd been discussing an idea for weeks and now seemed like the perfect time to share it. "Sophie," Emma began, "we've been thinking about doing something meaningful with the proceeds." Ethan nodded, setting his guitar aside. "We want to create a fund for young artists and writers, give them the support they need to pursue their dreams." Sophie's eyes widened. That's beautiful," she said, sinking into a nearby chair. "But managing something like that would require significant time and expertise." "We know," Emma smiled warmly. "That's why we want you to run it." Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. "Me? But after everything I did—" "You've more than made up for that," Ethan assured her. "Your marketing skills helped make our project successful, and your dedication to making things right has shown us who you truly are." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes as she nodded. "I'd be honored. I promise to make this fund something special." They spent the afternoon sorting through more letters, finding stories that touched their hearts. A woman who started writing poetry again after 20 years. A teenager who formed a community music program in his small town. A grandfather who finally published the children's book he'd been dreaming about for decades. "Look at this one," Emma said, holding up a letter decorated with drawings. "A 4th grade class turned our story into a play. They tied red ribbons around their school's oak tree." Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Sometimes I wonder if that little boy under the oak tree knew what he was starting when he agreed to marry you." Emma laughed softly, leaning into him. "Or if that little girl knew her pinky promise would change so many lives." Sophie watched them from across the room, her heart full. She'd already started drafting plans for the fund. Application processes, mentorship programs, community workshops. Their story of love and redemption would continue touching lives, creating ripples of creativity and connection across communities. The afternoon sun filtered through the window, casting a warm glow over the scattered letters, each one a testament to the power of their story, each one a promise of more dreams to come. The oak tree stood majestic against the late afternoon sky, its branches adorned with hundreds of red ribbons that danced in the gentle breeze. Each ribbon represented a piece of Ethan and Emma's story, tied there by the hands of those who believed in their love. The setting sun cast a warm golden glow over the gathered crowd, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Emma stood before a mirror in a small tent near the oak tree, her fingers trembling as she smoothed her simple white dress. Sophie helped adjust her veil, carefully arranging it around Emma's shoulders. "You look perfect," Sophie whispered, her eyes glistening with tears, like something out of a fairy tale. Through the tent's opening, Emma could see the oak tree where it had all begun, where a little girl had made a bold promise to a shy boy, neither of them knowing how their story would unfold. Meanwhile, Ethan waited beneath the oak tree, his hands clasped together to hide their slight tremor. The red ribbon from their childhood was carefully folded in his pocket, waiting for its moment. He had spent hours working with a local jeweler to incorporate a piece of it into a special charm for Emma's ring, keeping the surprise hidden even from Sophie. As the music began to play, a gentle melody that Ethan had composed especially for this moment, the crowd fell silent. Emma appeared at the end of the aisle, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She walked toward him with grace, her eyes never leaving his, while their friends and family watched with tear-filled smiles. When Emma reached him, Ethan took her hands in his. They stood together under the same branches where they had first met, now surrounded by the people who had supported their journey back to each other. During their vows, Emma's voice wavered with emotion as she reached for the red ribbon they had saved from their childhood. With gentle hands, she tied it into Ethan's boutonniere, her fingers lingering over the fabric that had carried their promise through the years. "This ribbon," she said, her voice clear despite her tears, "brought us back together when we were lost. It reminded us that some promises are meant to be kept, no matter how many years pass." When it came time for the rings, Ethan revealed his surprise. As he slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, she gasped at the sight of the small charm dangling from it. A delicate heart crafted from their childhood ribbon, preserved in crystal. "So you'll always carry our promise with you," he explained softly, his voice thick with emotion. The gathered crowd murmured in appreciation, many wiping away tears. Sophie stood nearby, clutching her bouquet, her face radiating joy for the couple she had helped reunite. Local townspeople who had watched their story unfold dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs, while fans who had traveled from across the country to witness this moment held each other's hands tightly. The oak tree's leaves rustled above them, the red ribbons swaying like dancers in the breeze. Each ribbon caught the light differently, creating a kaleidoscope of red hues that seemed to shower the couple in color. It was as if the tree itself was blessing their union, just as it had witnessed their first meeting so many years ago. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the setting sun broke through the branches, bathing Ethan and Emma in golden light. Their kiss was sweet and tender, a perfect reflection of their enduring love story. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the windows of Ethan and Emma's cozy home studio, where musical instruments shared space with stacks of books and notebooks. Emma sat cross-legged on their worn leather couch, sorting through old letters while Ethan strummed his guitar nearby, working out a new melody. "Listen to this," Ethan said softly, playing a gentle sequence of notes. "It's for the letter about our first Christmas after the wedding." Emma smiled, recognizing how the tune captured the warmth and joy of that memory. Their second project, Our Journey, had started as a simple idea during a quiet evening, but had grown into something beautiful, a collection that wove together their past and present through letters, songs, and cherished memories. Sophie, who had become their dedicated manager, organized intimate gatherings where fans could share their own stories of hope and reunion. These events often ended with Ethan performing, while Emma read excerpts from their collections, creating an atmosphere of connection and healing. Every Sunday, without fail, Ethan and Emma walked hand in hand to the oak tree. The path had become well-worn from daily visitors who came to tie their own ribbons, each representing a different story of love or hope. The tree's branches now carried hundreds of these colorful promises, creating a canopy of dreams that rustled in the breeze. "Remember when we tied this one?" Emma asked one morning, touching a slightly faded red ribbon. It marked their first sold-out show together, where Ethan had performed songs from their first book, while Emma read passages that moved the audience to tears. Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "How could I forget? That was the night you surprised me by singing harmony on the chorus." Their success had grown organically, much like the oak tree itself. Our journey topped bestseller lists and music charts, but what mattered most to them were the letters they received from readers and listeners who found courage in their story. Some wrote about reconnecting with lost loves, others about finding strength to pursue their dreams. The local townspeople had embraced their role as guardians of the oak tree, keeping it healthy and maintaining the grounds around it. They proudly shared the story with visitors who came from far and wide to see the tree that had witnessed such an extraordinary love story. One particularly meaningful ribbon marked the day they established the Hayes Carter Creative Arts Foundation, which Sophie helped manage. The foundation provided grants to young artists and writers, enabling them to pursue their creative dreams. Each recipient tied their own ribbon to the oak tree, adding their story to the growing tapestry of hope. In their home studio, Emma and Ethan worked side by side, their creative processes flowing. As their morning visit to the oak tree continued, Emma checked her watch and smiled. "It's almost time," she whispered to Ethan. Today marked exactly 1 year since their wedding day, and they had planned something special. The sound of approaching footsteps made them turn. Townspeople began gathering around the oak tree, just as they had done so many times before. Children skipped ahead of their parents, their laughter echoing through the morning air. "Miss Emma! Mr. Ethan!" A little girl with pigtails waved enthusiastically. She reminded them both of Emma at that age, full of dreams and unafraid to share them. Ethan pulled out a special ribbon from his pocket. This one was wider than the others and had their wedding date embroidered in gold thread. Emma's eyes welled up with tears as she recognized it as a piece from her wedding dress, carefully preserved for this moment. 1 year ago, Ethan addressed the gathered crowd, his voice soft but carrying. "We stood under this tree and made our vows. But really, our promise began right here, 25 years ago, when 2 kids were brave enough to believe in forever." Emma squeezed his hand and continued. "Every challenge we faced, every moment apart, led us back here. This tree has been our constant, watching over countless promises. Not just ours, but all of yours too." Together they approached the lowest branch where that very first ribbon still hung, faded but intact. Next to it, they tied their anniversary ribbon, letting it catch the morning breeze. The children who had gathered began playing tag around the tree's trunk, their movements creating a dance of shadows and light through the ribbons above. One little boy stopped to make a pinky promise with a shy girl in a yellow dress, making the adults smile at the familiar scene. "Some things never change," Emma whispered to Ethan, watching the children play. "And some things change in the most beautiful ways," he replied, gesturing to the hundreds of ribbons that now adorned their special place. The oak tree stood majestic against the morning sky, its branches heavy with years of promises kept. Each red ribbon told a story of love, of hope, of coming home. From certain angles, the sunlight made them look like flames, burning bright with the passion of countless dreams shared beneath these ancient branches. The children's laughter mixed with the whisper of ribbons in the wind, creating a melody that seemed to echo through time. It was the same laughter that had rung out 25 years ago, when a bold little girl had asked a shy little boy to marry her someday. Looking up at their tree, now transformed into a living testament of their journey, Emma and Ethan held each other close. The challenges they'd faced, the move, the forged letter, the years of separation, had only made their love stronger. Each ribbon represented not just a milestone, but a reminder that true love, like their oak tree, could weather any storm. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan and Emma, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.